So today we're going to talk about something pretty wild. How a private company, basically just looking for spices and a nice profit, somehow ended up conquering an entire subcontinent. It is a story of incredible ambition, brutal exploitation, and of course the fierce resistance that it sparked. And believe it or not, it all kicks off with one single, absolutely mind-blowing number.
95%. Just let that sink in for a moment. 95%. What on earth could possibly give you that kind of return on an investment?
Okay, so get this. On its very first trip, the English East India Company lost one of its 4 ships and most of its crew died. And even with all that disaster, they still made a 95% profit. With returns like that, the idea of getting rich wasn't just a dream, it was a concrete business plan. A plan that would eventually change India forever.
So let's back up a little. How did this all get started? This is part 1, a race for riches. What was it that drove these traders to risk literally everything for a shot at making it big in the East? I mean, you've really got to ask yourself, why would you do it? Why risk getting sick, starving to death, or your ship just sinking in the middle of the ocean to sail for months and months? It definitely wasn't just for the adventure.
Well, it was kind of a perfect storm of things happening all at once. First, the old-school land route to Asia got slammed shut when the Ottoman Empire took Constantinople, so that was out. Second, Europeans were completely obsessed with Asian spices, especially pepper. And third, all this new technology, better ships, better maps, the compass, suddenly made these incredibly dangerous voyages seem, well, possible. It was this mix of we have to find a new way, we really want that stuff, and hey, maybe we actually can. And the Portuguese, they were the first ones to crack it. In 1498, a guy named Vasco da Gama made it all the way to India and came back with a ship full of goods worth 60 times what the entire trip cost. 60 times! A number that big sent a shockwave all across Europe. Suddenly, everybody wanted a piece of the action. The race was on. Which brings us to part 2. Company becomes conqueror. Because, once the money really started pouring in, the English East India Company had a realization. To protect their profits, they needed more than just a few trading posts. They needed real power. This quote from Robert Clive, one of the main guys at the company, it just says everything, doesn't it? The whole mindset had changed. He looked at India, saw all the different rulers who weren't exactly best friends, and he didn't see a problem. He saw an opportunity. The goal wasn't just about trade anymore. It was about conquest. And they made it happen through a few key battles. In 1757, the Battle of Plassey gave them political control over Bengal, which was super rich. Then, a few years later, in 1764, the Battle of Buxar gave them something even better, the right to collect taxes. This was the jackpot. The company could now literally pay for its own army using India's own money. And by 1799, after they defeated the legendary Tipu Sultan in the south, their control was just spreading like wildfire. But, it wasn't all about fighting. The British were also brilliant with paperwork. They came up with policies like this doctrine of lapse, which was just pure bureaucratic genius. Basically, if an Indian king died without a son, the company just took his kingdom. That's it. No fighting necessary. It was quiet, it looked legal, and it was an incredibly effective way to just swallow up more and more territory. Okay, so let's move on to part 3, the price of power. Because for the company, this whole thing was a story of huge profits and massive expansion. But for the people of India, it was an absolute catastrophe. See, the company's main goal was to squeeze as much money out of the land as possible. And they did it with these really harsh tax systems. They had different names in different places, but the result was always the same: incredibly high taxes. And here's the killer part. Farmers had to pay a fixed amount no matter what. So if you had one bad rainy season, one flood, poof, you lost your land. This pushed millions of people into debt they could never escape. And this is the human cost. This gut-wrenching description from the novel Anandamath describes the famines that these policies directly caused. It shows you that this wasn't just some abstract economic plan. For millions of real people, it was a death sentence. And the devastation wasn't just happening on the farms. India had this incredible world-famous textile industry, but the company just flooded the market with cheap machine-made cloth from British factories. It completely wiped out the livelihoods of millions of Indian weavers and artisans. Which, of course, brings us to part 4, Sparks of Rebellion. People did not just sit back and take this.
For 100 years, resistance was always there, simmering under the surface and often boiling over. It wasn't just one big event. It was a constant state of defiance.
And this resistance came from all over the place. You had tribal leaders like Birsa Munda, who fought to protect his people's land and their way of life. And you had queens like Rani Chennamma, who literally picked up a sword after the British tried to take her kingdom. I mean, just look at this list of early uprisings. It's staggering. It was happening everywhere. You had religious monks in Bengal, tribal groups in central India, local chiefs in the south. These revolts were often put down, and brutally. But they prove one thing. From the very beginning, British rule was met with constant, relentless opposition. And all of that leads us right here, Part 5, the Great Uprising of 1857. This was the moment when a century of anger over stolen land, destroyed jobs, and broken promises finally just exploded.
Now, the thing that finally lit the fuse was a rifle cartridge. A rumor started spreading among the Indian soldiers, the sepoys, that the cartridges for their new rifles were greased with cow and pig fat. And to load the rifle, you had to bite the cartridge open. Now, this was a massive religious insult to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers, and it united them against their British officers like nothing else could.
One soldier, a man named Mangal Pandey, openly defied his officers. He was captured and executed almost immediately, but his death turned him into a martyr. The spark had been lit. Not long after, soldiers in a city called Meerut rose up, and the rebellion was on.
The rebellion just spread like crazy, and it was led by incredible figures like Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. Remember that doctrine of lapse we talked about? Well, her kingdom was one of the ones that was taken away. She refused to give it up and became one of the most ferocious and legendary leaders of the entire fight. The rebel soldiers, they all marched to Delhi, and they declared the old Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah II as their leader. This was a really powerful, symbolic move. They weren't just angry soldiers anymore. They were trying to completely overthrow the British and bring back a pre-colonial Indian authority. In the end, the revolt was crushed with unimaginable brutality, but it changed everything. It shook the British so badly that they completely dissolved the East India Company. The era of a corporation ruling a country was over. From that point on, India would be ruled directly by the British crown. The entire game had changed. So, we're left with this final question to think about. The rebellion was crushed, yes, it failed. But by bringing all these different people together, soldiers, farmers, kings, Hindus, and Muslims, in one huge, bloody struggle against a common enemy, did it actually plant the first real seeds of a single unified Indian nation? Now that's something worth thinking about.